Hey crafty friends, it's Christina. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm just going to be having a grand old time coloring, stamping, die cutting, and making 2 cards. I have a basket of supplies and things I've purchased recently, and I was cleaning up my craft room and I thought I am going to start using these products. So I took out this adorable stamp from Simon Says Stamp called Happy B-Day. And I'm going to actually stamp every single one of these images. I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to use or which ones I wanted to color, but I just figured, you know what, I have the stamps out, let's just stamp out everything, and I'm glad I did because I ended up using almost all of them except for maybe some of the sentiments. But I am going to stamp everything out. I am going to use some Memento Tuxedo Black ink because I am going to be using my OLO Markers today. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp that out onto my MISTI. I have some Express It, white cardstock, and I am inking up those stamps. I am going to go ahead and stamp this twice, especially the sentiments, because my ink pad is running low. I even pulled out my re-inker, figured I'd stamp it, see what it looked like, and I figured I think it's okay. So we're just going to go ahead and stamp out those sentiments a second time and get a nice crisp dark sentiment there, and then I will clean my stamps up and I will start coloring. I know I've said this in previous videos, but I am not the best at coloring with alcohol markers. The more I do it, the better I'm getting at it, and I really feel like this time around it worked out really well. So I guess I just need to practice more with coloring, because the more I do it, I feel like every time I start to color, I get a little bit better. I'm using some OLO markers today to color. I do have a couple of other types, but OLO is my absolute favorite for coloring with alcohol markers. I usually color with a darker tone, and then I will come in and blend out with a lighter tone. And usually with my darker tone, I just outline what I'm coloring in, and then I will just blend it out with that lighter color. That's the best way for me for coloring, and that's, I think, why realizing that's the way I need to do it has helped me quite a bit. A cup of coffee has appeared for me. My darling husband delivered me some coffee, so it was a nice little treat. I just colored away, and I really took a long time to color. I colored in all of my bees, and then I was trying to decide what color, what shade of black to color in the stripe on my bee. And I started off with some cooler gray colors, and I did not like that at all. So I switched over to a warm gray color. So you'll see that I did go ahead and re-stamp the image that I did the cool gray coloring in, and then moved over to the warm gray. But I'm going to throw on some music. If you want to skip the coloring part of this, and you can check the timestamp down below and you could just skip over the coloring part. But I'm going to throw on a little bit of music, and you can grab yourself a cup of coffee and enjoy some coloring. For the bees' wings, I colored them in with a light blue alcohol marker, but one of the wings I noticed I didn't get a full stamp, so I just grabbed one of my mono drawing pens and just finished filling in the outline of that wing. And then my secret, it's not a secret, but it's in my little trick, I use a white gel pen to repair any spots that I either went over the lines or I accidentally colored it in a section that I wasn't supposed to, which is what I did with the bow. One of the little areas I did color it in and I wasn't supposed to. I'm going to start creating the backgrounds that I'm going to use for my 2 cards. Now, I will be honest, I started off with only planning on making 1 card, and I sprayed with some Distress Spritz, a piece of watercolor paper with antique linen, and then decided I was going to also spray a little fossilized amber. And when I lifted it, I liked it, but I wasn't over the moon about it. I ended up really liking it because I ended up using it on a card, but I wasn't totally thrilled. This isn't really what I was thinking. I should have just sprayed the antique linen, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to try it again, another piece of watercolor paper. And for this one, I'm spraying mostly in the middle. And I really like this because I got the darker color in the center, and then it kind of, the honeycomb was a little bit lighter as it went out. Just cleaning up my stencil with the baby wipe. I'm going to heat set my watercolor paper with my little Heat It tool, which is not an embossing gun. It's just great for drying paint really quickly. I did go ahead and die cut all of the images from that stamp set, and I really love these. I think they're just so stinking cute. I will tell you that the sentiments I'm not going to use. I did decide that I didn't want the white, especially because of the watercolor paper. So later on, I'm going to go ahead and cut them out into black cardstock and do some embossing with them. So I'm just going to put away all of my dies, and then we will keep going with our card. I'm going to play around with my images and decide how I want to set them up on my card front. At first, I thought I was going to do a portrait style, but then changed it to a landscape. I'm going to use 2 of the bees with the cake in the middle, and I really think that is super cute. One of the things that I realized as I was kind of playing is this is where I didn't like the white cardstock, so I will stamp that out in the black cardstock with white embossing powder in a little bit, but first I'm just going to pick my sentiment, and I believe I picked the sentiment that says, I hope your birthday is sweet. The next thing I need to do is I want to cut down this die piece, or cut down this panel, and I'm just using some A2 rectangle die sets, or die cuts, and I'm going to cut this out. So I was trying to just see what size I needed it to be going with the images, so I ended up going a size smaller than I had thought I was going to go. I'm going to re-stamp my sentiment. I am doing the I hope your birthday is sweet sentiment on black cardstock. I'm using my MISTI to stamp this out. I have my powder. I forget what that's called, embossing powder. It's the anti-static, that's it. Anti-static powder, so that when I put my embossing powder down, it does not stick to anything other than the Versamark ink. So I'm going to use my sentiment, pick it up with the lid of my MISTI, stamp this out with Versamark ink. One thing I like to do is when I use Versamark ink, I like to let it set on the cardstock a little longer than I normally would if I was just stamping it out. I'm going to use my little press to make sure I have a good, nice and even coverage of the ink. I thought I was going to have to do 2 passes of the Versamark, but one seemed to work. And for my embossing powder, I am using my Hero Arts Ultra Thin Embossing Powder. Is one of my favorites. Just going to sprinkle that on. Sometimes what I like to do is do 2 coats of the embossing powder. I feel like that gives me the best coverage. I'll just funnel that into my container, and then I'm going to heat set it with my heat gun. Sorry, I seem to be all twisting of words. So I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that, and then we'll be back with a little bit more. Since I used a cream colored watercolor paper, I knew I didn't want to put this directly onto a white card base. So I pulled out a piece of Kraft cardstock, which I'm going to mount to my white card base. I'm going to stamp this out. I have this gauze background. It's a Gina K rubber stamp that I've had for many, many years. I do believe that she does still have this, but it's a clear stamp now. So I'm going to stamp this out using some Concord & 9th Pebble ink, and I love the way this turned out. What you're going to see is it's going to be pretty dark to start, but then it's going to really lighten up to the point where it just looks like textured cardstock, and I absolutely love it. I did start by planning on doing this on the MISTI, and I realized the backing was still on this rubber stamp, so I decided I'm not going to peel the backing off. I'm just going to ink up the rubber stamp and put my cardstock right onto the stamp. I did do this twice, so I had 2 of these panels. I missed a whole section, but I just dabbed it right in there because it's the texture. I didn't really, you can't even notice that I did that. So it looks pretty dark now on screen, but as that ink dries, you can barely see it, and it looks just like a textured cardstock, and I absolutely love it. Now I'm going to start playing around with this other panel. I have a couple of bees left over from my stamped images and colored images, and I thought, this is where I thought I'm going to use that panel. Even though I wasn't totally in love with it when I first sprayed it, I figured out a way that I can incorporate it into making a second card. So I am grabbing the Honeycomb Tag die set, also by Salmon Says Stamp, and die cutting the panel that I created on the watercolor, the tag, as well as some of the honeycomb pieces. I'm going to run those through my die cutting machine. Once I have everything die cut and ready to go, I'm ready to start putting one of my cards together. I struggled with getting this panel onto my card base. I think I've ripped that piece of cardstock off of the card like 3 times. I left it in here because I wanted to show you not everything is always perfect. It's usually also why I usually use glue, a liquid glue, to put things down, because a tape runner, luckily this particular tape, takes a little bit before it's permanent, so I was able to move it around. I'm going to take that panel that I made, that I cut down, that's done with just the splatter in the middle, and add some foam tape to the back. I'm going to add some dimension by popping that off of the card front. And before I even made this into a disaster, I just grabbed my liquid glue, added liquid glue to the foam tape so that I can center this up. If I did not do this, I could tell you that that panel that I would put down in the card would have been totally crooked. So I did put the glue down. It seems like whenever I put glue down, I managed to get things done straight. Since I'm going to layer my 2 birds with the cake, I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of the cake and adhere that directly down. I'm going to put my list sentiment down at the bottom just to help me give, to make sure I have enough space at the top and the bottom when I am putting those cakes on here. And then I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the back of the birds. I do a lot of foam adhesive. They're not quite as thick as the foam that I used for the back panel. It's a very thin foam, and it just gives it just a little bit more depth on my card. I wanted to play it safe again and use liquid glue, which I'm glad I did, because as I put my 2 bees down, I realized that they're both looking off to either side and not at each other. So I did a little quick swap, and thankfully I used that liquid glue because I don't know if I would have been able to get it down cleanly. I did swap them so that they were looking towards the center rather than off to either side. My sentiment, I did add some liquid glue to the embossed, or the die cut piece sentiment, dropped it on top of my images that I worked so hard to color, but it's okay. They weren't ruined. And then I did go ahead and adhere that down. I do have one more thing I want to do to this card, but first I'm just going to take my white gel pen and add some accents. I used it to highlight around the bees. I used it for the cake, and I also used it to kind of highlight a couple of the lighter areas of the ribbon. I'm going to start putting my second card together. I am putting down the Kraft cardstock to my card base. This is also stamped with the background stamp. I did die cut that panel using the honeycomb dice or tag set, and for this I wanted to add something a little bit more natural, so I wanted to add some of the twine. This is the May Arts twine. I've had it for years, love this twine, comes in handy for so many things. I fed that through the top of the tag and then just tied a bow at the top. And because this die cut piece was warped from all of the spraying I did to it, I did go ahead and add lots of foam tape to the back of this. Again, used my liquid glue to adhere it down. Brought in my sentiment just to make sure that I had the right height. I will stamp that sentiment also out on black cardstock with a white embossing powder. It's going to trim the the little bow, and I'm really liking the way this comes together. At first I was a little hesitant. I wasn't completely sure I liked it, but again, once I had it all together, I really ended up really liking it. So I was going to put 3 bees on my card, but ended up with just 2 of them, and I think that was really cute. So the other thing I want to do is just use this honeycomb piece that I die cut from that same set, and I was going to stick it underneath the section of the tag, but it turns out that it was too big. So I just took my scissors, cut it down, and I put one towards the top and then one down towards the bottom. I am going to adhere down my images to my card base here. I went with foam adhesive, added the glue to the back. That's my old tried and true. And then I realized they're just a tad bit crooked, and I did notice that they were off. As a matter of fact, I feel like I moved one and not the other one enough. So, but I was trying to decide if I wanted to add anything else to this other than my sentiment. So I am just going to adhere my sentiment down, again, doing the foam adhesive with some liquid glue. To finish off both my cards, I needed to add a little sparkle. I debated on using some sequins. I pulled out a bunch of them, tried to see if I liked any of them, but ended up with these Gems by Honeybee stamps. I believe they're called Vintage Love, and they were the perfect accent for both of my cards. I did have struggle, as usual, with pulling these off and getting them to stick in places. Some of them were on the floor. I don't know. So I did finish this card off with adding gems to both of those cards. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Found it fun. I had a great time playing with stamps that have been sitting in a basket that needed some love. If you are interested in the supplies, I will leave them down below in the description of this video. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.